All right, welcome back to the Atlanta Child Murders Revisited. It is 26 October, and this is ATKID video number 7. So we last left off at 81 Memorial. We're going to go to another location here, and um, the reason I'm doing these geographic locations is for two reasons. If you don't understand the geography and the locations that were involved in the Atlanta child murders, you'll never understand the Atlanta child murders. If you don't understand the neighborhoods where these kids grew up, the places where their bodies were dumped, and these other locations related to Michael Thevis and Jimmy Ginn, you'll never understand the Atlanta child murders. Okay? They're all intricate, they're all stages upon which the Atlanta child murders is played out. It's not some random void of something that just randomly happens. It happens at certain locations. It occurs. Things are take are occur at certain locations for a reason. So it's very important that we go through the geography and the landscape of the Atlanta child murders for you to understand it. This is why people are confused. This is why people don't believe Wayne Williams killed all these kids, because they don't understand the background and the intricacies of the Atlanta child murders and what else was involved. Another reason I'm doing this is to kind of lay signposts, or what do you call it, lampposts, or whatever you want to call them, something that we can come along and lay the evidence down in. So I'm just briefly, this is a long opening statement like in a court case. I'm telling you, kind of giving you the background, specifically related to my background and how it relates to the Atlanta child murders, because that's how I come in. That's how I found all this information. I didn't know anything. 6 years ago, I had not a clue. But once you start reading the evidence and going through the documents and going through the videos, it becomes really clear what happened. The reason why people are confused and don't understand the Atlanta child murders and are willing to go to their safe comfort zone of it had to be white KKK racist guys doing it, it couldn't have been one of our own, is because they haven't done the work. They haven't studied the documents. They haven't seen the videos. They haven't made the connections that I have done. They haven't looked at the evidence. You're making a conclusion about something that they have no idea what they're making a conclusion about. And in life, you can't do that, especially nowadays when things can be AI'd and things can be faked so easily. You have to have all the evidence, or as much as possible. And even that sometimes is not enough to make a good decision. Now, I also go by common instincts or common sense and my gut, but I base that on the evidence I find. Nothing I'm telling you is something I've made up in my head. Nothing I have said or will say is really my opinion. These are the facts. Now, I do speculate, and when I do speculate, I say so. Okay? So, right now, I'm laying down the foundation of where the Atlanta child murders happened, the geography, and then I'm going to go back and lay down the documents and the evidence to show you and back all of that up. Okay? This is my opening statement. We're not done yet. We're not done for a long time. I was going to do these videos like every other day, but now the clock is ticking. I'm getting close to 60. When I started this journey, I was 53. Okay. So I need to start wrapping it up. So I'm going to do a video every day until I get through everything. And then I'm going to do some other things after that. All right. So the next important spot that may not seem related to the Atlanta child murders, but it is, okay, is a place that I knew very well as a child called Colony Square. Okay. So Colony Square opened in stages, and I'll get into more detail on that, from like 1960. I think it started construction in 1969, and then it opened in stages. So basically every year they would open a new building, and it was right here, okay, right off of 14th Street in Peachtree. And so they built it in stages, and I think they're still building, they're still renovating. um, when I Let's see. So how I come into this is my mom, like I said, had taken us down away from my dad down to Macon. My dad took us out to Monroe. He knew she couldn't survive in Monroe, so the closest place that she could get to us and still see us was Atlanta. And she had friends in Atlanta, so she moved to Atlanta. And in Atlanta, she worked various jobs, I think from like 1969 to when she married my dad in April of 1975. Mostly were waitress type jobs. I can't tell you exactly. I seem to remember a Shoney's somewhere. I don't know where. Um, she also worked at James Brown, had a series of restaurants like 1969, 1970, so early 70s. She worked there because I remember coming to visit her, and James Brown came there and was singing in his restaurant in Atlanta, because that was one of his biggest. I have no idea where it was at. It was somewhere in Atlanta. And James Brown brought me on stage, and we were singing. I'm 3, 4, 5 years old maybe, and I'm singing with James Brown. Okay? That's just the facts. It's just the way it is. I didn't think that what you're going to find is I'm going to be rubbing shoulders with all these fucking people that are famous and powerful, and I'm just a kid. I have no idea who they are. I could care less who they are. The mayor, football players, police, singers, I don't give a shit who they are. I don't know who they are. That's the way kids are. They want to go play with their toys and their friends. So if you're the fucking mayor and you're shaking my hand, I could give a shit who you are, okay? So, along with working in restaurants, my mom, I think after she lost her job at James Brown, because James Brown's restaurants only lasted like 2-3 years, then I think she was working at Shoney's. And I don't know if she was working at Shoney's part-time, and then she got a job as a security guard part-time, or maybe she was working at Shoney's full-time and got a job as security guard part-time, or maybe it was back, the opposite. I don't know. I don't keep track of that stuff when I'm 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. Your parents are your parents. And then, so what would happen is once a month, I would come visit my mom. My dad would bring us usually to Stone Mountain. We'd meet in the parking lot there under Stone Mountain. My mom would get us, or get me, and we would go. Now, I had a brother and I had a sister. My sister was about 4 years older than me. My brother was about 5 years older than me. And I had a half brother who didn't live with my dad, who was about 8 years older than me. He lived with my granddad. So I never remember, well, very rarely did my sister or brother come with me to Atlanta to visit my mom. It was always usually just me and my mom. Now, my sister may have come other times. I'm dead certain that my brother never would come, maybe like the holidays. So, like around Christmas, my, I guess my brother, for the, you get out for the holidays. You get like, what, 2 weeks for Christmas? So maybe like 1 week. My dad was always working, so we never even had a Christmas tree, okay? So we would go stay with my mom for at least a week, and that's when my brother and my sister would come. Now, whether they came other times during the year, I don't know. During the summer, I don't know. I seem to remember a few times I was hanging out with my sister, but the majority of the time, when I came once a month, I always came with my sister. Now, this is important because I don't know if my sister saw the people and the things that I saw. I don't know to this day. We never talked about it. It never came up. I never knew that the people that I was hanging around at that time would be involved in the Atlanta child murders years later. I'm what, 1970? I'm 4, 5, 6 years old. So from 1970 till approximately 1972, my mom was a security guard in this Colony Square building. Now, I think she did work and make rounds in other buildings, but I always remember being in this building right here. Okay. And so let's see, we'll go down here. I didn't know where this was at. I knew it was in Atlanta. I knew Atlanta was a bigger city than Monroe. Think about it. When you're 4, you don't know shit. Okay. So let's see. So I think it's the 22nd floor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. It may be not the 22nd floor. 17, 8. Wait, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 20, approximately 22. The reason I say 20, this 22nd floor, is because on the 22nd floor was the office of an attorney by the name of Eugene Smith. Okay. Now, my mom was a security guard, and she had this little clock like round thing in a leather bag with a strap around it that she would carry around. And so when I would come visit her, she worked during the day, during the week at her restaurant. And then on weekends, Friday night, Saturday, Sundays at least. I don't know, maybe she worked there during the week too. I have no idea. All I know is Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. I would come there Friday after school, and I would go back like Monday morning. My mom would usually drive me all the way over there and drop me off at school. So I'd spend a good 48 plus hours with my mom once a month. Once a month, that was it. So she was a security guard. She would make rounds, and usually how it worked, I always remember, is that I'd get on they have elevators in the center here. We would get on the elevator and go up, and then all the way to the top, or maybe the second floor before the top. I think there's some kind of conference room or something else up here. But the last office floor at the top, which I think is the 22nd floor. And we would go down about midway here, and then she would unlock this office and leave me in this office. And she would say, now don't touch anything. Just lay down there or sit on the couch and play with your toys, and I'll be back. And then she would close the door and lock it. And then she would go around each floor, going down the fire stair and just checking, make sure all the offices are closed. I think she had to do this like once every 2 hours or so. And at each floor, there was like a little key. And she would have to take that key and put it inside this clock. And it would put an imprint with the time and the floor, because of the key, on that piece of paper that was wound inside that clock. And then every morning she'd hand that clock over. And then that way, the owners who owned this building and hired the security guards knew they were making their rounds. They weren't just sitting down here and goofing off and drinking or carrying on or whatever. They knew because you had to physically go to each floor and find that key. And the key wasn't always in the same spot. And sometimes the owners would come in and move it. I remember my mom complaining. She'd say, those damn bastards, they don't trust us. They moved the key from over here to over there on the 15th floor. So now I got to tell everybody. So my mom, I think she worked for Pinkerton. If I remember, the name of the security company was Pinkerton. And I think they had an office down here somewhere. And she was one of the first licensed security guard females to carry a gun in the whole state of Georgia. One of the first. She even made the newspapers. I remember her showing me that. And so she would leave me in this attorney's office, Eugene. I had no idea who he is, okay? Eventually, over the years, I would meet Eugene Smith. They called him Uncle Gene, okay? I remember his office. It had a big wooden table. He had a big high leather seat, and the seat faced away from the windows, but I would sit in that seat sometimes and look out the windows. And if you look straight that way, right here is Peachtree. You're looking straight down Peachtree. And back in those days, it was all lit up. There was all kinds of strip clubs and restaurants and lots of lights. So it was pretty cool for a kid to see all that. And then you could see all the way past that to downtown Atlanta. And I would play on. He had this big. It was either a white bear rug, or it was like just a white shaggy rug. He had a rug there, and then he had a couch. Sometimes I'd fall asleep on the couch, but it was like that for about almost probably over 2 years. 70, 71, some of 72. So about 2.5 years. I was visiting my mom once a month and hanging out in Eugene's. And she would do this. She would basically almost do the whole building and then come back up. In the beginning, she wouldn't do it as much, be gone as much, because I'm 4 years old. But as I got older and I knew what to do, what not to do, sometimes as I got older, down here in this lobby, right by this post, I remember this post there, and these little coffee shack things weren't there. It was just straight concrete, you know. But by this post, I remember about 72, 73, something like that. There was the first video game I ever saw. And I think it's either Space Invaders or Asteroids. I think it was Asteroids. Maybe it was Space Invaders in the beginning, but then became Asteroids. And I even looked it up, and I'll go into this, that it did come out right, because I was trying, well, did I really remember that? And then it was Space Invaders that came out first, and then Asteroids, I think about 72 or so. So Space Invaders like 70, 71. Asteroid came out in 72. And I remember playing this game. So my mom would, it's 1, 2, 3 in the morning. I'm playing video games, and, police cars are going by. Woo, woo, woo. People are, this is kind of a nice, rich area, but it was also close to the Vice area down Peachtree, just right down the street there. So this was my world. This is where I lived, not lived, but this is where I stayed at my mom, I think, was living, she had a boyfriend named Butch. And Butch was this big guy, and he was a nice guy. And they lived, I think, down in East Point because and they lived like, you know, someone had taken the the attic of a house and turned it into an apartment. And I always remember that place because at night they had 8-track tapes, and Butch had an 8-track tape player, and he had bought like Mary Poppins and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I guess my mom had bought those, and I would listen to that. But I also would be listening to his stuff like Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, all those things. A lot of cool stuff, you know. But when you're like 4, you don't really, you're more interested in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang than Led Zeppelin. But we continued to go to this place up until like 1974. But in the summer of 1972, for some reason, my mom stopped working there as a security guard. She may have still been working, like on the days that I didn't see her, but when I would come visit her once a month, she wasn't working as security guard there anymore. So, what I find out in my research, and I didn't know this, all I knew is that my mom was working at this new place, a music studio close to downtown. Her boss or boyfriend was this guy in his 40s. He had bald, looked like mostly bald hair. He looked like he had a lot of money. He had a little pencil like mustache, and he had this cane. Sometimes later on, he was using this cane, and he had a bodyguard and a car. And our lives improved immensely. My mom ended up getting an apartment nearby Piedmont Park here. She got a brand new car. Um, I called the guy Uncle Mickey. I had no idea who he was. Okay, what I would find out is that Uncle Mickey was the famous or infamous pornographer by the name of Michael Thevis, the guy I've been talking about. At this time, I'm, in 1972, I'm 6 years old. I have no idea what pornography is, who Michael Thevis is. I didn't know Michael Thevis. It's not like adults come to you and they shake your hand and say, hey, I'm the famous Michael Thevis being chased by the FBI. And, you know, I'm a killer, and I'm just the largest distributor of pornography in the country. They don't talk to kids that way, okay? I think now that I researched about it, and I'll just tell you real quick how I found out about Thevis, and I made the connection between Michael Thevis and Uncle Mickey. So I'm seeing him as Uncle Mickey, and you think about it, when you were little, a lot of people were just your uncle. You didn't know what they did. You didn't know, you know, if they were criminals or what their life was like. Okay, you just knew they threw football with you or baseball with you every once in a while. That's all you knew about them. This is the same with Uncle Mickey. He would take us to movies at the Fox Theater. We would go out to dinner with him, and he was really nice, but he seemed to have a lot of power. People seemed to like, snap, snap, go, go, and they did what he said. When he spoke, people moved. Okay. So this attorney whose office I had been playing in was the attorney for Michael Thevis. I'm going to show you videos where this guy named Jap Hanna is found dead, shot, and body stuffed in the trunk at the Atlanta airport. And then the news media is interviewing Eugene Smith, this attorney here, and asking about his client, Michael Thevis. I didn't know any of this back at that time. Okay. So I'm doing my research, you have to read and watch everything. And I see this video. It's absolutely crazy. This guy is an author. I don't even remember his name. But basically, he's blaming like 90% of all the killings on this like neo-Nazi guy from the 70s and 80s, which is completely untrue. And I don't even remember the serial killer's name. But I hear this voice, okay? And he goes, well, what about the connections between Wayne Williams and Michael Thieves? And I recognize that voice. And I'm like, and I'll show you the video someday. It's Dwayne Hendricks. I recognize that voice anywhere. Dwayne Hendricks is this guy you hear on the Atlanta Monster, and he's an advocate for Wayne Williams. That Wayne Williams was set up and framed by the police and all this kind of bullshit. But I recognize that voice, and I'm thinking, well, and see, even if you disagree with someone, it doesn't mean some information they have may not be useful. So every time I come across somebody that I disagree with talking about something that I don't know about, I go find it out because apparently they've researched it and found this. I didn't know who Michael Thieves was. I started researching, and of course, this killer said, yeah, there may be some connections there. I mean, not the killer, but the author said there may be some connections there, but he kind of blew it off. And so I write down Michael Thieves as I'm listening to all these videos. I write down everything I hear. I go and research Michael Thieves. Initially, I didn't get a picture of Michael Thieves. I just read about him. And then I see that he went to jail December of 1974. It was in jail all the way to, except for when he escaped in the summer of 78. He was in jail and died in jail like 2000, what, 18, 17, something like that. And I just write it off. Oh, well, he wasn't out when the Atlanta child murders were happening, so how could he be involved, right? And so I set it down. But then later on, I came across another something with a connection to Michael Thieves. Somebody said, I read somewhere, that the studio, which we're going to go to very soon, the Sound Pit, Apogee studio, where Wayne Williams had been bringing the kids to audition, had been owned and was still owned by Michael Thieves, even though Michael Thieves was in prison. And then I said, whoa, something else is going on there. So I started researching on Michael Thieves. I do a deep background. I find his attorney, because when you do the incorporations papers, you got Eugene Smith on the incorporations and MC or George Thieves and his wife and all these incorporation papers. Now, eventually, Eugene Smith will step out of the limelight. When Thieves goes to prison, you don't see Eugene Smith that much involved, except when Jimmy Ginn goes to sue the IRS to get back the Sound Pit Studios that he lost in the auction. Guess who he hires as his attorney? Eugene Smith. So I think by this time, Eugene Smith in the 80s is getting a little older, so he's not doing as much as that. But kind of Ed Garland kind of takes over the reins. And the first time I hear about Ed Garland is in a case with Jimmy Ginn. And I'll go over this case in 1970-72, where Jimmy Ginn is under indictment for importation of something like 500 tons of marijuana from Jamaica on an airline that was incorporated by Ed Garland. So Ed Garland's there defending him. And then after Thieves goes to prison, it's Ed Garland, Ed Garland, Ed Garland, Ed Garland on every case with Thieves. You'll see Thieves' name represented by Ed Garland all the way to the Supreme Court to overturn the interstate transportation of pornography. Ed Garland, Ed Garland, Ed Garland, Ed Garland, and Eugene Smith starts to die off. So Uncle Gene, we saw every once in a while. I remember he would pat me on the head. I think he even bought me like a little astronaut toy, little rocket ship. And, I would continue to play in his office there for a while. But then after the fall of 72, we didn't come back to Colony Square. I never saw my mom making rounds anymore because she was working at a new place. All right, so how are we doing on time? So, all right. Now, right here, is it right there? 14th. I think it's right here on 14th. Or is it? No. Now, Peachtree at that time was set up with all kinds of porn industries. Atlanta was an open city, okay? The crime families in New York had divided the country up, and each family controlled a city or a portion of it, okay? Atlanta was kind of the new city, and so it was like the Wild West. No one had claim to Atlanta, so all different kind of crime families were moving into Atlanta to set up shop. One of the big industries besides drugs was the pornography industry. All up and down Peachtree here was full of porn theaters, adult porn shops, all those. This is where Thieves breaks out right there. He started over here at a newsstand on, what was it, like 14th? Yeah, it was 14th near Georgia Tech. And he found out that the vast majority of his sales, even though it represented a small amount of the volume, was the pornography magazines. So he got into the pornography industry. I'll just give a real quick summary. He got into printing and distribution of printed pornography. Then he got into um, manu- copying and manufacturing of film, pornography film. I'm sure along with that went some child pornography. And then he got into the interstate transportation of that. Now, a lot of the film was being produced from a studio that he and the Gambinos owned out in Los Angeles. Okay. And this is where he was getting in trouble. As the trucks would leave with the film, they would get caught or stopped along the way. There was a case in Texas, and the trucks would be inspected, and they'd have the pornography in the trucks, and that's where he got in trouble there. And that's where the feds, he got the eyes of the feds there. Now, another thing he did was invent a machine. Well, he didn't invent it. There was another guy. He was in in a department store, and he saw this little machine, and he saw kids. They would put a coin in the machine, and they put their eyes up to this glass, and there was like a little 8mm film that would run. It was usually cartoons for about 30 seconds. And he saw that the kids kept feeding the machine with all their coins. And he came across a brilliant idea. He was going to take those machines, buy up as many of those machines as possible, go around to all the adult porn shops in the country, give the machines to them for free, and it had a meter on it. And then he would load them with adult porn. The customers would come along and they would watch that and feed the machine. And then every 2 weeks, every month, he would send around his associate who would read the meter, and then they would get a certain percentage of, like half of the sales. He got rich doing that. He became a billionaire doing that. Also, he basically took over for the crime families, for specifically the Gambino families, to his association with a guy named Don DeBernardo. about 90% of the pornography distribution inside the United States. And the majority of that was run out of the Marietta store and then later by Jimmy Ginn out of the 881 Memorial. But the guy who helped him invent those little, I guess, like video machines was a guy named Jap Hanna. He saw how rich that Michael Thieves was getting, and he didn't like that. He wanted a piece of the action, so he quit. And then he went and started making his own machines. And then what that was bad enough, he started going around. So like on Peachtree here, there would be say 20 porn related businesses, adult theaters, um, magazine shops, stuff like that. Out of those, Thieves probably owned 15 of them. There were another 5. So that's where Jap Hanna went with his machines. Okay. Thieves didn't like that. And so Thieves invited Jap Hanna, I'm going to get into this later, to his office, and we'll get into that about what happened. So my world with Uncle Mickey began right here on Peachtree. We would go down, and right here, is it right here? Yeah, let's see. Hold on one second. It's hard. I can't believe it's hard to find. Oh, right there. Okay, there it is. So this was the Fox Theater, okay? And the Fox Theater had been around since the 20s. Gone with the Wind had been there, and by the 1970s, it was run down. This whole area was full of pornography and filth. Um, there were 2 things going on in 1974. My mom was still dating Thieves. Thieves was fighting all of his federal charges and winning. Um, they were going to tear down the Fox Theater and make a parking lot. And I remember one time we went and saw some movie, Bedknobs and Broomsticks or Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, or no, it was The Godfather 2. We just saw The Godfather 2. And we came out and we were standing like approximately right here because I remember looking up and could see the lights of the Fox Theater sign all lit up. And we're waiting for Thieves' bodyguard to come along with the car. And my mom looks up and she goes, it's really a shame that they're going to tear this beautiful theater down. It's too bad that somebody rich, and she kind of looks at Michael Thieves, wouldn't come along and, become a benefactor and save the Fox, buy the Fox Theater and save it from being tore down. And Thieves, you can see the lights come on in his eyes. And I kind of looked at Thieves and said, "Yeah, Uncle Mickey, why can't you save the Fox Theater? Save the Fox." I didn't know that my mantra to Uncle Mickey later on would become the mantra to save the Fox. Now, Thieves later on did put in, like, this is like August of 1974, did put in a bid to save the Fox. Okay. But because he's a notorious pornographer, the wealthy elite in Atlanta were so aghast that they formed their own committee, got donations, and bought the Fox before Thieves could get it. Now, this theater I've been many times, and after that, I think I saw Sting. Yeah, I saw Sting in 1985 at this movie theater. No, 86. I saw Sting. Now we would go up and down um, Peachtree in his his car with his driver, his bodyguard, and we would tour and go up and down to these different restaurants, and it was like a fun time. Once a month, I got to hang out with Uncle Mickey, my mom's boyfriend, and we had fun. It was, I didn't know he was the world's biggest, what do you call it, porn dealer, whatever. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, there is about 1972, approximately right here off of 10th, actually right across from the Federal Reserve. I think it's in this parking lot right here. There was an associate of Thievis's by the name of Jimmy Mays. And Jimmy Mays, kind of the same thing. He was working with Thievis, got tired seeing how much Thievis money he was making. He went out and he started his own thing with different porn businesses. And of course, Thievis didn't like that. So he hired another associate of his who had been sent down by the Gambinos to monitor him by the name of Roger Underhill to make a bomb, put in Mays' van, and blow him up. So one day, I think 1972 or 73, Mays goes out to the parking lot, turns ignition on his car, and boom, he's blown up and killed. The murder of Jap Hanna, who was found in 1970, like I said, shot in at the Atlanta airport parking lot, and the murder of Jimmy Mays, the police and the FBI knew had some relation to the porn underworld, but they didn't know who was responsible. They had an idea it was Michael Thievis, but they had no proof. All right. Now, something I didn't know that I learned, that there was a street, okay. Let's see if I can find this. Right here. That kind of paralleled Peachtree Street between Peachtree and West Peachtree, called Cypress Street. Okay. Now, Cypress Street was this notorious, how do you say, street of male prostitution. So I go over this in my other videos, but in every city, near between the downtown business core and the suburbs, there's going to be an area, as people are working their way home, where they're going to be buying their drugs, and there's going to be people that are going to be picking up prostitutes. There were lots. I didn't know this until I read an article about it. There are lots of male prostitutes on this street. Okay. And right around the same time, before and after the Atlanta child murders, there was a guy known as the handcuff man. And so what he would do is he would come down Cypress Street, or he'd go to Piedmont Street, and he'd tell them, these prostitutes, male prostitutes, that he was a professor and they were doing a study that, you drink this drink and, drink a couple of drinks and see what the effects are. And stupidly enough, and he would pay them like $50. Stupidly enough, some of these guys would drink that. Okay. And then they would wake up in bed, chained to the bed or handcuffed to the bed and being beaten. And some were set on fire. One was killed. Maybe two or three were killed. And then they were always knocked out and their bodies dumped someplace else. Now, these were all white male prostitutes, okay? This went on exactly at the same time as the Atlanta child killings. It started about 75 and it ended about 95, when the guy who ended up being a prominent lawyer in Atlanta was doing this. Now, Right here at 6 in Cypress, this guy, this lawyer, in about 1983, I believe, got caught. And I didn't know any of this, and so I started researching, okay? I found this article. He got arrested because he had picked up an undercover police officer, knocked him out, and was attempting to kidnap him and go back down 6th Street when his car was surrounded and he was arrested. For some reason, the case was dismissed and he was never went to prison. So he continued doing his thing for another 12 years until finally he was caught. He, after that, he even murdered a few people, okay? But he moved from this area over to Ponce de Leon and up to Piedmont Park and continued doing that. He would come up, he lived in Tampa with his mother, and he would come up now and do this when he would come up. And that's how they were able to trace him. They actually, somebody saw his Florida tag number and they were able to trace him from that. Now, right here, is it right here? Yeah, right here is the Atlanta Biltmore Hotel. I think it's something else now. But in May of 1980, about 2 months before I ran into Wayne Williams, I had made all state chorus in 8th grade. And they held it the next year in 81, they held it down in Savannah. But all state chorus, basically, they have singers audition from all, in each county across the state. And from each county, they pick a few people and they come together, about 1,000 of them. We practice. We stayed and practiced at the Biltmore. We got there on a Friday. And then on Sunday evening at the Civic Center, right across from Colony Square, they had a big concert. Now, what we didn't know at the time, we knew the Atlanta child murders were going on, but we didn't know about Cypress. The prostitution street was right behind where the Biltmore Hotel was. Now, there were security guards inside the Biltmore that wouldn't let any children out. Okay. And I remember specifically there was like a 7-Eleven over here, and we wanted to go to the 7-Eleven. And I remember the security guard looked at the other one. He goes, "No, we can't, remember we can't let any of the kids out." And he goes, "Oh, it's okay. It's a white kid. It's two white kids. Don't the killer's only killing black kids." And we remember, I remember them saying that, and I was like, "Is he talking about?" And I'm talking to my friend. Is he talking about the Atlanta child killer? Is the Atlanta child killer out there? And what I didn't know is that the Atlanta child killer was out there, because right in this area on West Peachtree, I believe it's Peachtree, was the Sansucci Lounge, where Wayne Williams would say that he went that night before he went out to look for this woman and gets caught near the bridge. Also, on Spring Street over here was the Ataman office. I think it was like 7th. Yeah, it was like 7th and Spring. It was like somewhere in here. That's where I think 3 of the victims worked at, including Nathaniel Cater, the latest victim. Down West Peachtree from the Fox Theater, down here somewhere, was the Cameo Lounge. That was a place that Nathaniel Cater would go to and do his tricks and sell his body and pick up clients, I guess you could say. Right here, one of the second victim, Alfred Evans, was supposed to be going here to a movie theater to watch a kung fu movie, and he disappeared after that. All right, so we got a few minutes here. All right. Now, right here at Simpson, and I always find this interesting, that one street over on Baker Street from the studio on Simpson, they have the Children's Museum of Atlanta. Pretty crazy. But right here on Simpson, it doesn't exist now, was the Sound Pit, the Apogee studio. Now, this is a place I knew pretty damn well. Now, if you click on Street View, okay, it's just going to show you this new apartment building here, okay? But right here used to be the entrance of the Sound Pit Apogee Studios. It started off as the Apogee, and then it changed. When Thieves went to prison, Jimmy Ginn changed it to the Sound Pit, but sometimes people still called it the Apogee Studio. Now, in order to see where it was at and not see this building, you have to go over here on Street View. Yeah. And then you turn around. Oh, nope, they've updated it. Up. Let's see. Can I get it to work? I got it to work last time. That's the world of Coca-Cola. Yeah, there it is. Okay. You see there? Now, before that building, it was a parking lot. And I always get the numbers mixed up, so I don't know if it was over there or over here. I'm pretty sure it was over there. But this was the front entrance. Stevens and my mom would park around back. Sometimes Stevens would park in the front. Right there used to be little parking spots where that sidewalk is. And my mom was a receptionist, secretary at the Sound Pit from the summer of 1972 till about the fall of 1974. And she also, I'm pretty sure, was one of the girlfriends of Michael Thieves. Okay. Now, when you're 6, 7, 8 years old, you don't know what the relationship is between adults. You don't know if they're sleeping together. You don't have any clue. All I know is that my mom always had her arm in the arm of Michael Thieves. She had his right arm, and in his left arm, he had that cane. Okay. Now, whether that is a boyfriend girlfriend relationship, I don't know. She just could be showing respect for her boss. I never saw them kiss. Um, I never saw them naked or do anything inappropriate. But she always had her arm whenever she was with him, and we went out, and we went. Not too many bosses. Well, I guess some will be taking their secretaries and their secretaries' children to movies and to dinner, unless something else is going on there. So, in my mind, they were dating. I don't know about in my mom's mind. I remember asking her after in 1975, whatever happened to Uncle Mickey when she was dating my new stepdad, and she almost screamed and said, "I don't want to ever talk about that man again. Don't ever bring that man's name up again." And that was it. When you're 7 years old, 8 years old, you do what your mom says. So we would go in there. In this studio, if I remember correctly, about this side, there was like a little room, because I was in this room. I went in there, recorded my voice doing a few songs. There was another bigger room back here where they had people with drums, guitars, pianos, keyboards. I even remember there was a big gong I used to play with by the drum set. And then kind of in the center here was the control booth. I went into the control booth. The engineer would help, show me how to do what he was doing. They had these reel-to-reel tapes that they would run and do all the recordings. And I would sing songs. There were constantly I would get here on a Friday, and on either Friday night or Saturday, we would come to the sound pit. And now I had no idea what went on during the day. Anything could have happened during the day, during the week, God knows what. And I don't even know really if my mom worked there at all. That's what she told me. She says, I sit here at the desk. I'm the receptionist. I answered the phones. And I don't know. She could have just been making that up. Okay? I never saw her sitting at the desk or making phone calls because I wasn't there during the week. But apparently that's what she did. She handled the business from that point of view, I guess you could say. And there were engineers. There were constant, for 2 years, every time I came in, there were constantly different singer groups, whatever. I assumed they were singing groups because they were all dressed up different ways. But it was right here. That was the summer of 72 to about the fall of 74. In December of 19, after the fall, I went back to school in third grade. I think September once we came here, and then after that, we never came back to the sound pit. My mom never told me what happened. She just never talked about him. All of a sudden in January, my mom was dating someone else, someone who would become my stepdad, and they would get married in April of 75. My mom would never talk about Uncle Mickey again. Now, I've got 3 minutes. What happened later on is I learned, and this is why I know do I know for sure, 100% sure that my mom was working at the sound pit? I'm about 90% sure. Okay. Things have changed around, moved around. The building's not there, but it seems like the appropriate place. Do I know my mom was working there? I'm about 90% sure. Do I know that Uncle Mickey was my mom's boyfriend, even though he was married and had other girlfriends? I'm about 75% sure. Do I know that Uncle Mickey was Michael Thieves, the pornographer? I'm about 75% sure. Okay. I can't say absolutely because there could have been another studio in Atlanta that my mom got a job at with a guy that looked like Michael Thieves. But I highly doubt it. Because Michael Thieves' attorney was Eugene Smith, worked in the same building that my mom was a security guard in. His office, I've seen pictures of his office. It's the same fucking office that I would hang out in as a kid. Okay? I've seen pictures of inside the sound pit. It's the same place I would go as a kid. I've seen pictures of Michael Thieves with his cane. It's the same guy, the same fucking cane. I've seen pictures of Michael Thieves with his bodyguard. It's the same bodyguard. I remember him, okay? Michael Thieves and my mom, we all went to the Atlanta Zoo with the bodyguard. Michael Thieves and my mom, we went to Stone Mountain, and we went hiking up Stone Mountain. And it was funny to me that this guy with his cane was limping up this mountain in his fucking three-piece suit in July. And there were other people behind us that the security guard was watching that were also dressed in suits. Now that I think about it, that was probably the fucking FBI following us around. But when you're 5, 6 years old, you don't pay